Good evening, everyone, and welcome once again to the Writer's Room. I am your moderator, Kat, the Night Editor, and with me this evening is...
J.Ishiro Finney, author and alien in a human suit, and author of Scars. And thank you for all the people out there that have currently purchased it. Sales have been good.
And our other guests are...
Florida woman. I like to write things with uplifted dogs and cats and yes.
Hey, I'm Yang Zhao. I very slowly write fiction, RPGs, all that kind of stuff.
Excellent. And this evening, we are discussing when is it too much? Now, what is it that is too much? This is a question from our very own Janelle. And she had asked, at what point do you take too much time to do your research? Or when is it that you put too much of that research into the story and sacrificing the narrative or being entertaining?
Yeah, when does the research get in the way?
Yeah.
Well, I guess since you're looking at me, I'll start out.
Well, I can't look at them they can't see me looking at them, so.
Looking at them very, very inquisitively.
Yeah, so who would like to go first?
Well, I've started.
Well, go ahead.
I am something of a research fanatic as someone who's OCD. When I research something, I really research the ever-living hell out of it. Yeah, there is the problem of you can get distracted from research. My method, some people have called this, method writing, in that, I see what you just saw. Method writing, in that when I am working on a topic, story-wise, it's all I'll consume. It's all I'll read. It's all I'll see. It pretty much fills my life. So like when I was doing Case File Arkham, I only watched noir films. I only read noir books or books about the period. I listened to radio shows and music and radio shows from the period, not just noir, but anything, just to get a sense of what the mindset was. Everything I did was focused in on that time period to kind of get a sense of what that time period was like. You can overdo that. You can get burnout that way. As far as putting it into the book, you have a greater risk of doing that with prose than comics. So it wasn't that much of an issue with Case File Arkham. When I was doing Titanium Rain, same thing. You've got to, with a comic book, you have got to be very, very economical with your words. You cannot just, you do not have the page real estate to blab on and on and on. But in prose, yeah, there is very much the risk of saying too much or doing an info dump. Fiona, I think, is going to get into genres where people like that. But again, I will bring up the story you guys are most familiar with in prose, because it's the one I've been promoting the hell out of. In Scars, the story was legitimately inspired by not only having gotten a rat and befriending one, but in my own strange psychotic way of over-researching everything. There's a part in the book where I have James say, well, if I can research the hell out of everything to learn how to talk to the AI on the ship, I can learn how to talk to the rat. And in a sense, in real life, I was researching everything I could about rats to understand how they perceive the world. That's where I came across all the research and the scientific experiments being done on them. And yeah, you've got to make sure that the story comes forward first. And there was a lot of information, real stuff and speculative, that I just cut. Kat was very good at saying that we don't need to know that. And the easiest way that anytime I wanted straight data dump, I would usually actually break up the chapters with a quote from usually something real, a real excerpt from an article or a scientific journal. And that was an easy way to get that information across.
Yang, Piana?
Yeah, sadly, Mr. David Weber is going to be at the forefront of it's too much. especially once he got long in the tooth with Harrington. I get that he likes to
Say
know
what
how his-
Harrington is so the audience
Oh,
knows.
Honor Harrington is basically his premier military science fiction series. And earlier books, the editors were a little bit more even keeled because Weber wasn't a bigger name yet. But I would say about 6 to 7 books in, probably after book 8, it went into like, this is how all the tech works for all the LACs, like basically the little miniature ships that would pour out of the big battleships and then be able to fire in all the missiles, and here's how all the missiles work, and then you get pages of how the missiles work and the velocity, and it's like, where's the plots?
Now, from what I understand, there is an audience for that. There are people,
Mhm.
not me, but some people like that kind of writing. Is that
Yeah,
true?
a lot of the tech heads are with military sci-fi. They like to know how a lot of those things work. I was just there for like, how's the characters going to get out of this one?
Yeah, I think that a lesson in physics and engineering probably would yank me right out of the story. I would say a good example of one where research was slowly seeded very well into the story. Uh, all nod our heads in honor of Dune being disgraced by a movie, but Dune, in that, again, every chapter opened with a quote to the world setting. And if there was something that you needed to know, he would usually explain it as it was happening.
Mhm.
Yeah?
Yeah, like the ornithopters.
Yeah. I mean,
But you were only given as much as you needed
Right.
to know.
Actually, I think he didn't say enough about the ornithopters because you had to figure out what the hell an ornithopter was. Another one would be Philip K. Dick has just this incredible way of, in his earlier works, communicating very complicated psychology concepts and concepts of philosophy, but mainly psychological research, into a story in a way that's almost invisible. Scanner Darkly does a wonderful job of this. And the way he did it was the character was being told how the test worked. Easy enough. And then he experiences it.
Actually, I thought the best one was when he was given his diagnosis.
Yeah, there you go. The doctor is trying to explain it easily to a patient what had happened. That's a good way to do it.
Yang? Oh, I'm sorry, Fiona.
No, just saying, like, I think that's why I made my serial space fantasy, so I could be like, I don't really want to worry about the overall physics. I'm going to just get down to its pew-pew.
That was kind of the benefit of Star Wars, wasn't it? It was like, it just works. Or, well, wait, if they have this, why don't they do this? Because that's how the universe works.
Yeah, and the thing is, you can make up very simple rules for a lot of the tech to follow, and you don't have to go head over heels into like, well, this is how Newtonian physics works. It's like, but then again, depending on the kind of reader you have and what wheelhouse it is, some of them expect the sad people with wrenches. But not all of them are always sad. But still, it's just like, if I wanted a physics degree, I would have gone for it.
Yeah, that'd take me out of a story.
But some readers are more nuts and bolts because their what is it, tension of their narrative tension or their suspension of disbelief will come from, like, does this person know some highly specialized knowledge for a battle or for how some tech works? And I think for as far as Pulp Rev goes with the Heroes Unleashed stuff, Mr. Kit over there, for a lot of his stuff and even his independent stuff like Babylon Blues, he goes into research mode when it comes to highly specialized military tactics. So he knows how his cop characters and military characters would react in like a high stress situation. So certain stories might require specialized knowledge, so that way readers who are in the know and actually have some of that knowledge will be like, yeah, this guy got his stuff right.
So, since all three of you, but both of you, and Yang, I'm looking at you at the moment.
Okay.
Unless you were going to chime in on the previous.
Well, I
point.
was.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Just briefly, I would say no research is ever enough. It's just you need to find a way to sort of filter it down to the most important things. And I think, too, how much research depends a lot on the setting and the feeling of your story. So the more distant you get from our present day life, the more research you need to do to understand how people of a similar time felt. So, for example, in the RPG I'm working on, a lot of it is kind of like Bronze Age populations. So I need to go in and like, well, how is, Bronze Age different from a typical medieval fantasy setting? What was their lives like? How do they view religion? And religion in particular is something that I think in general needs a lot more research on, because as a society, we don't value it very much. And most people treat religion like you would treat an adult softball league. It's just something you do once a week.
I used to go to a Lutheran school, and yeah, that was very true. But so from you take a look at research as making sure you understand the nuts and bolts of the world setting that you're writing in. So when you write, do you go into detail about these things, or is it just this is the lives of these people, and if they need to go to church on camera, basically, then that's how it would be. But otherwise, you're not going to bring it up, or how do you approach it?
Well, if you're talking about religion specifically, most ancient societies, religion played a far larger role in one's life, because it wasn't just I'm asking this supernatural deity for favors, which is essentially how religion started. You make some sacrifices, you kill a rabbit, you give your best crops, whatever, and that deity would give you knowledge, wealth, beauty, lots of women and children. But it also functioned as like social support systems. For the most part, governments didn't have like food banks. They didn't have, career centers, job works or whatever. A lot of that was done through the religion, and the people who were in the religion, be it like priests or acolytes or whatever, they were held as some importance in the society. So even if your characters aren't particularly religious, there would be certain things they would do. Like if there were a holiday like Christmas, even if you're not religious, you're still going to celebrate Christmas. You would recognize like a priest's importance in society, and you would act on it that way. So in religion in particular, but also in, in a society all over, like what do they value? Is it a society that, like in our society, we're told as kids, violence is never the answer. What if you're in a society where violence is the go-to answer? How does that change how your characters would act? How does that change people's reactions to your characters? I think it's all kind of necessary to look at how those pieces fit together.
So like if your character were a thuggy.
Yeah, exactly. Like why would you kill people? Why is it okay to assassinate people?
Okay, I wanted to use an example of how I did adding some technical information to Titanium Rain. The scene is the character is blacked out because he pulled a turn too hard, and which I get into in a prior scene. When you pull too many G's will knock the pilot out for a brief time. So the pilot has woken up. He sees the ground racing towards him, and he needs to get out of it. When the ground is racing up to meet you and there's seconds before you're smoking a hole, the gut reaction is to pull hard. Put some serious distance between you and the below. The trick is to fight that urge Pull too hard and your engine stalls. Pull too hard and you're dead. The trick is to ease into the climb. Aim low and try to miss the ground only by a sliver. Now, There's a lot of technical information hidden in that. It just doesn't sound like it. Okay.
Yeah. So, like, how long do you think it took you to really understand flight and how, like, that kind of mechanics worked?
I spent about a year researching, reading lots and lots of biographies from, or autobiographies by fighter pilots, going out and meeting them, talking to them, reading about famous air battles, reading about the internal workings of planes, how the Air Force works. And the thing was, it's not just learning about flight, but learning the mentality of the people flying the jets and how they think and how they behave.
The culture.
Yeah, the culture. And it's interesting how much you learn about flight just by listening to how these people talk about it. But yeah, it took about a year of research. Would you say that?
Yeah, I'd say about that.
And at that point in time, I had watched nothing but war movies, read nothing but either fiction, but mostly nonfiction, of either factual information or autobiographies.
Yeah, we were living in San Diego at the time, so
Lots
of
of
course we
visits to
went to
the
the air show,
museum.
and then we drove out to Luke Air Base for their air show. So,
yeah, I was going to say something else, but I already forgot it.
basically, I can say that there was a lot of the research that he did that did not get into the book outwardly, but it was important that be there in the background, just to inform how these characters are going to be reacting to certain situations.
That's actually that was what I was going to bring up. Thank you for reminding me. Yeah, one of the things about the question, when is what do you put in the book, what do you don't put in the book in terms of research? I'd say 90% of what you've researched, you never blatantly say. In comics, you might put it in the background, but the vast majority of things is the reader doesn't need to know how the plane works. The reader generally doesn't know how flying a plane works, or even fighter pilot techniques are not important. But you need to know how it works. You need to know what the pilot is thinking, even if you're not saying so. You need to know well, for instance, if you're writing a war story, this is an easy example. You should understand how the firearm works. Even though you're not going to constantly explain, well, I have to clean it every day, and well, this part does this, and this part, no. But you need to know that, so when the character's reacting, they know that, and it'll how they hold the gun, what they're going to do. Another one would be in crime noir, almost never mentioned, but I needed to know how police work, what their relationship with PIs were like, how they handled people in the 40s, just the basic procedural, just so your characters knew what they were supposed to be doing at that moment.
Well, I know, for other stories, you needed to know how contemporary, cops, how they handled things. And so you did a ride along.
Oh, yeah, that was very important.
And almost none of the direct things that happened in that ride along made its way in the writing. But again, it's the how the cops proceed, how they how they get the calls nowadays, how they take notes, how they do all of that. That all helped to inform. Joe the Pagan says, one of the reasons I loved Scars is that you explain the steps in technology to get to Max, something that I find lacking from a lot of near future science fiction. Okay, so if I'm getting what you're saying, Joe, is that sometimes it's not too much, it's too little. So how do you all feel about that?
Well, what I was going to say about that with Max is, again, how much came out of my own experience of researching for real, trying to figure out why our rats were doing what they were doing. That's a story for another time. But another thing was, it was really important for me to do a lot of research on astronauts. So as James is talking about his post-traumatic stress, you learn a lot about life in space in that book, but you don't really notice it, but your brain does. Most of the stuff I said about living in space and all the things it does to you, totally real, absolutely real. And the things that are kind of up in the air, like lassoing satellites, I kept it very vague because we honestly still don't know how we would do it.
Do either of you have any comments about when is too much too much? Or how about for you yourselves? How do you tell when is too much too much?
When I keep branching off and trying to write new things, and I have to tell myself, no, wait, just stick on the thing that you're supposed to be doing. You don't need to go through all these rabbit holes in the writing. And then I just sort of copy and paste them into a junk document that occasionally I'll look back at.
Kind of like world building pillars. Like, don't make the magic system overtly complicated.
Yes.
Not unless you really want to. Kind of like Full Metal Alchemist, I suppose. But I'm trying to see it here. It looks like it's not popping up on the other side for the YouTube side of things. But Dark Stranger was like about accurate gun usage with how absurd, TV film and sex.
Oh God, yeah.
The thing is, like with Galaxy's Edge by Onspock and Cole, the veterans, the special ops guys, that they take notice of the research those two did into making some of the gunfights more accurate, because part of Galaxy's Edge is the Legionnaires and how their whole military kind of setup got broken down by the over bloated kind of bureaucratic process of what's happening with Earth. But they wanted to have some sort of connection to a lot of those vets that read their series, so they put in the research to get some of that stuff accurate, like whether it's tactics or how those soldiers would react. So sometimes it's good to do, depending on what kind of audience you're targeting, ultimately to make up the bulk of your series of readers. Sometimes it's good to do some of the research to where they'll realize that, yeah, you did look into this, like how they would do their job, how they would do their operations. And even though you don't put everything under the hood in there, they can recognize the signs of it.
Okay, this question by Retneck.
It's not a question, it's a statement.
Well, the statement, okay, I actually want to comment on that about spaghetti westerns. Okay, this actually gets into genre. Now, unless you're going for hardcore realism, in a spaghetti western, that's almost more mythic and fairy tale in a lot of ways. Often those stories aren't to be real. The gun's to be treated more like a sword. It cinematically does what it's supposed to do for the hero at the time.
Okay.
That's all.
So, going back to the topic.
Oh, well, in that case, research into the gun itself is useful, but in that case, if you were doing a spaghetti western, like, fistful full of dollars, right? The firearm, the revolver, is essentially like the knight's sword or the samurai's sword. It's more symbolic. It doesn't really function like a real gun. So you have to weigh that balance of how much of this is a mythic weapon. It's almost magical in a sense.
Really, I'd say study the scene from is it Good, the Bad, the Ugly? Yes, when Blondie is getting a new gun, and the gun dealer
that was
is
hilarious.
talking about, but the gun dealer is giving the specs on the guns that he's selling. Now, it's appropriate for that scene because it's a gun dealer. He's trying to make a sale, so of course he's going to give the specs on the guns that he has and why one is better than another. But for your main protagonist to say, except unless you're Dirty Harry, going on about the specs of your gun to the audience, that can come off as boring unless, as Fiona said, that is your audience.
Well, keep in mind the gun seller, a lot of that, what he said was complete nonsense.
It doesn't matter.
Okay.
I'm saying that we're talking about when is it too much?
Yeah.
When is it too much information to give to your audience?
So yeah, in a spaghetti western, just like Star Wars, technical information isn't that important.
No, in fact, most of the time the person has no clue. Yeah, all they know is the gun at their hip shoots things. They usually don't know how it works.
In fact, a
goes
lot of the
pew, pew.
revolvers you see,
Exactly.
Goes-
It goes pew pew.
a lot of the revolvers you see in those old westerns are really a little too modern for the time. The guns they were using were far less accurate, far less reliable. They weren't using brass for most of that era, but in the films they do because it's mythology.
Yeah, exactly. So, so would Yang or Fiona, would you say if you are being more like rooted in reality, like say in a past time frame or a modern time frame, that would require more research than if you were to do again like a futuristic setting? Or do you think futuristic settings require just as much research?
Depends on the kind of futuristic setting, because people who want the the one book I linked earlier, Torch Ship, he is a physicist, but he doesn't let the overall tech details slow down the story. He just does it in little bursts. I wish Mr. Weber would remember to do that nowadays. But if your futuristic setting is being more based on our current tech but extrapolated, say 50 to 100 years in the future, then yeah, they're going to probably expect you to have some basic notion of how a certain kinds of ships would move in space if we didn't have FTL and we just still had conventional ways to get to another planet.
Oh, okay, I got it.
Let Yang.
Sorry. And I was
No,
going
go
to say, the stuff I write is usually more based in things from the past. So for that, I think it is very important to do a lot of research because people have been to museums, you've read stories, you've seen movies that take place in the past. And if they're too far off, if you don't understand the way things worked, it's going to be a problem. And the other thing is, if you're writing for a game, you may need that extra technical nonsense that would really slow down a book. But like, there's one chapter where my characters are on the water and they're trying to avoid pirates. So then there was the question of like, in a book you just might write, they went really fast. But I had to figure out like, okay, so how many feet would this boat travel in 6 seconds? And how many nautical miles could it go in a day? Like that's, in general, for most books, you probably don't need to go that deep, but it certainly does help when you want to figure out timelines and how one thing compares to another.
Cool. What were you going to say?
Well, I was going to say, as far as futuristic settings, I would take the Star Trek versus Star Wars rule, as in what kind of story you're setting. With Roddenberry, he created the setting, he created what he wanted, and then he researched it to say, okay, how would that work? He got science advisors from JPL to say, okay, this is what you would have, this is what they'd need to do. And so he went that way. Whereas Star Wars, which is more of a fantastical tale, it's, again, mythological. Lucas didn't do any research on deep space or gravity or, the various things needed to pass the speed of light. He talked and read Joseph Campbell and studied old mythology. Mm-hmm. That's the difference.
And actually, I would say Babylon 5 kind of bridges both of those, because Straczynski knows the hero's journey and things like that, but he also researched enough in the tech to where he could extrapolate, like, this is how a Star Fury would move, and how the centrifugal force of the Babylon 5 station would, keep everybody grounded, and how poor Sheridan would have been a pancake when he fell out of the tram to avoid getting exploded.
And if you want to talk about what's too much, George Lucas is actually a fantastic example.
Yeah, prequels.
Because, not even the prequels, just on the original Star Wars, he had so much technical stuff in there. Carrie Fisher would sit there on the set and be like, nope, nope. And she rewrote most of what became the Star Wars script, rewrote the dialogue. So like characters weren't speaking all these crazy technical things about,
So,
hyperdrives and stuff.
so if he had gotten his way, it would have been Babel.
I don't know. In some ways, it's like the Battle of D-Day. Like that could have gone so wrong for the Allies in so many ways. Star Wars should have been a complete and utter mess, especially if you've seen clips that were in the original edit that Lucas's wife took out later. I mean, just everything that could have gone wrong from Lucas went wrong. He's got great imaginative ideas, but he really needs good editors to rein everything in. And I think that's really
Look at Howard the Duck.
exactly. That's really one of the main ways you can avoid having too much research in your writing is get an editor, a real editor. If you can't get a real editor, get some friends who don't mind giving you some blunt criticism and, have them go through, and then you can figure out like what you need to take out.
And I would also stress, don't just study, things like technology or the nuts and bolts of a setting. Never overlook that everything has their own internal culture with their own lingo and idioms and rituals that they go through. And crickets.
Yeah, well, now I think about it, and also don't worry about what unsolicited feelings on Twitter say about certain things. Like, no, do what you're gonna do. You want your samurai to have laser swords and just go off on their merry way? Then okay, then go for it.
But yeah, I think you're right about the different cultures. I mean, that's half the conflict and half the drama right there is how different cultures relate to each other.
Well, I was actually saying cultures within or subcultures then, because again, like a lot of the research was just learning what fighter pilot culture was like versus Marine culture, which is vastly different. Or, cops, the culture between cops and detectives, or mafia. I mean, they all have their own little subculture with their own idioms and rituals they have to follow. There's certain things they do and say that's unique to them. That is just fascinating.
So do you find that makes it easier to write characters when you have like the knowledge of the cultural backgrounds?
Oh, absolutely, because it greatly informs a lot of the word choice. Because it's an easy one. Finding out that if someone spends too much time as a fighter pilot, suddenly almost everything they start talking about gets littered with call signs and lingo from flights. There was one great story, for instance, where this isn't the pilot, this was the ground crew. There's a hand signal you do when it's called pull the chocks, which means pulling the blocks out from under the wheels of the aircraft, meaning it's ready to launch. And they would all make that hand gesture of pull the chocks at bars when they said, okay, when it meant, okay, let's go home. Things like that. So yeah, it did actually inform word choice, how they spoke, definitely how cops spoke. Well, I don't want to get into noir because that's a very specific kind of writing, and it isn't realistic. It's stylized.
It's a mood.
Yeah, it's a very stylized setting. With Scars, I really went out of my way to read about how astronauts talked and what was important to astronauts. And then with Max, I can't reveal it because it'll ruin the story. There's reasons Max talks the way he does. And a lot of his word uses are because of where he's from. And so, yeah, it greatly influences dialogue and sentence structure, or even how they just approach other people. But again, fighter pilots, all aggressive type A personalities.
Let's see. Horizon Talker says to Fiona, Taylor Anderson does a pretty good job balancing the technological and action aspects of his stories.
Yep, it's why I linked the Destroyer Men series in there, because he did have to do a bit of research and in terms of how a lot of World War II tech worked. But then when they went to this alternate Earth along with one of the enemy ships, it affected that alternate Earth that was still stuck in more primitive tech advances, in terms of what they were coming through with. But yeah, he doesn't overwhelm the reader. He does it in chunks. So if you are going to have something like that, try to have it serve what is happening in the plot at the time.
Yeah,
Agreed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
very much so.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I
Go
saw
ahead.
Lucas Koval's comment, and we did do an episode on romance, but if people really want, we can do a more adult episode.
Isn't Bible Black hentai?
Yeah, we were
Oh, that was the
gifted-
one with the lady dick. Oh,
Yes.
God, I did not. No, I'm going to go get something to drink now.
Oh, Jesus. No, he actually just threw down his headset and now he's walking
right.
out of the room.
But no, like honestly, personally, guys, you're not going to see that out of a protocol. I'm just like, I can't do it. I could do cosmic horror. I could do adorable, uplifted dogs that will help save the day. But I can't. No, I can't bring myself to do bedroom scenes. Sorry.
So, Fiona, what's your research method of choice? Are you more of like a YouTuber, or you like reading books, or talking to people? Or?
I do a bit of both sometimes, because certain kinds of things I need like a visual aid, like certain kinds of weapon systems if I'm looking at that. But yeah, I do a bit of both. But mostly I do space fantasy because I can make up my own internal rules for the setting. And then if I do feel like doing any kind of cultural research, I'll just do it on the side as it comes up in the story. It's like, okay, do I need to know how they did X, Y, or Z? Or can I just make up something on the fly, Because even though you have pillars to the story or to the world building, you could still add little things here and there to where it can make more internal consistency for that setting. You don't have to beat people over the head with stuff.
Yeah, that's true.
And I like to mostly do some of the character development and some of the world building elements in the quotes that are at the beginning of each chapter.
Yeah, that's actually something I like to do too. I think it sort of makes things feel more real, right? Like there should be all sorts of written material in whatever world you're in.
Yep, and it's actually kind of a double framing device, because one of the quotes I usually put in there is from my main character's recollections to the people of the 42nd century, because they wanted to know what happened, certain ways in the past. Even though they can view things from a certain angle, they don't really get the full context. So they're looking at these journals that she's writing, which is really she's recording herself speaking into like a hollow sphere, and just like, oh, well, this kind of happened, but here's my input from this angle. So it's kind of like a couple different framing devices. So I'm having fun with that. Mainly so people know that there is going to be a happy ending from my team of heroes. So that's the biggest thing I want as a reader and writer nowadays. Like, I want to know that there's like some ray of hope at the very end of the story, and I'm not just reading this all and then I'm going to be kicked in the face at the end. It's like, ow.
I know that you've already mentioned it, but I just want to bring it up for the sake of the show. So do you see then research for your futuristic setting is actually a hindrance rather than a help to your stories?
It depends. Sometimes I've been looking at a lot of past TV shows to be like, hey, they implemented that in an interesting way. In some ways, some older shows had more imagination about what the future would be like, and they had a more positive outlook on what the future would be like.
Yeah. Well, again, you're basically discussing the hard line between hard science fiction and, I guess, science fiction, or even sci fantasy, as far as is it a hindrance? It really depends on the kind of story you're telling. But I will say that if you're trying to predict the future, you're just going to date the hell out of yourself.
Oh yeah.
You're immediately putting a expiration date on your story. There are ways around that, but we'll get into that later. Yang's question about studying cultures, does that affect how I write characters? And I said yes. Another one came to mind. This isn't about cultures per se. I guess it is, actually. In writing Scars, I did a ton of research into what it's like to be an amputee with a prosthetic leg. And that informed the hell out of his behavior and his habits and his daily rituals and what he needed to do. I mean, I learned a lot about how hard it is to be an amputee. And again, it's just background things that makes it feel real.
Yeah, and I think that's really the heart of what people relate to in stories. So, like, if you're doing something too far in the past, or like if you're in the future, and like people have become tentacle creatures who have psionic links, that's very hard for people to relate to. So, if you could just ground it with something, even if people don't really understand that well, but they know from our world, like, they know guns, and even though they kind of don't know how they work, maybe they, you have an idea, or you somewhat have an idea how planes work. As long as there's something to ground it, I think people will latch on to your story and ideas much more easily.
Yeah, and I think the other thing you want to aim for is, the last thing you want is somebody to pick up your book, flip through it, and say, well, I'm a pilot, and this is bullshit. That doesn't help your sales.
Yeah.
Although what does help your sales is when the engineers from Lockheed come by and say, yeah, that's a good idea. We may actually have to do that. Not kidding.
Wow.
Yeah.
Are you getting actually royalties?
Oh, that'd be nice. Although, yeah, when we were at Emerald City, that happened.
What it was is I had written that the F-35 was not really an effective dogfighter, and so they had done an upgraded version with Ford swept wings and a bigger engine, and that's what they were like. Yeah, that's probably going to happen. Yeah, it needs that.
Hey, it made a sale. They were impressed enough.
It made 3. Yeah. They all bought them.
Mm-hmm.
But they were laughing because they were agreeing that the F-35 needed a bigger engine.
Well, I know when they had first come by, they asked me, this thing can't dogfight. I'm like, I know it can't dogfight. This is why it can in this. And they're like, yeah, okay.
He said, yeah, it's got Ford swept wings and a much bigger engine and more fuel. And they're like, oh, okay, you did your research. But they also thought it was funny that we acknowledged that. And it is mentioned in the story. It actually is mentioned.
But to go back to the topic, it's way pared down. We actually, or he had figured out all the specs for the whole plane.
Mm-hmm.
And it is in there. In fact, there is a page of specs that if you wanted to take a look at it, you could. But as far as the story goes, it's only mentioned if the narrative requires it.
Well, yeah, remember that was a giveaway we had with the Kickstarter, was you could get this poster that had the plane and all the specs.
Mm-hmm. So yeah.
Well, here's something. Bar One Studios is mentioning the opposite of the too far in the past is unrelatable. It's the past, but everyone acts and thinks like a 21st century hipster. Yes, that can also knock you out of a story where it's like, I'm reading to escape current year shenanigans. That's the reason why I even developed an alternate Earth where their history, while there might be some few similarities, it went off in a different direction from what is standard. So that way I don't even have any historical figures like in terms of that's immediately recognizable in Upload Protocol. Ronald Reagan wasn't walking around. I have a quote in the beginning from Carl Sagan because I like the way that guy describes space, but they don't have the same people that exist there, and they don't even have the same proxies in most cases. Because that's why I find alternate Earths fun. You don't have to follow our history. You can make up something completely different. You could make up an Earth where the only nation that ever rose up was Egypt, and it could have gone off in 5,000 different directions. You know, at least that's how I see that.
For myself, I have to agree. I actually, that's why I can't write fantasy. I just can't really get into that head mindset after a certain point. And it's why I've never written a story prior that set anything further back than the 1940s. I just, anything after, I could probably do a Western, but yeah, the further back you go, the harder it is for me to really relate to it. And it really does throw you if you have your knight come in and say, bitches, I'm taking you down. Yeah. Suck on that motherfucker. Yeah, it's like, no, that's just stupid. And I've seen stuff like that.
Well, and with that said, I know you could feel comfortable doing an American Western, but the exact same time period is Victorian.
I couldn't do that.
So
yeah, I could not do Victorian. I could do American West.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, my whole thing is I don't want to be limited by whatever's happening currently, like now on this planet Earth. It's just like that's why I enjoy about the pulps because they extrapolated, a bunch of crazy adventures. Like beautiful women on Venus and and Virginia jump good. Just like here you go, like just being telefax to Mars, and then you're basically become the warlord of Mars and win the affections of a beautiful princess. It's like, here you go. That's my jam right there. It doesn't have to make any darn lick of sense in terms of relating to our reality.
Well, with that said, then, kind of continuing on the idea of when is too much, but slightly changing the subject matter. I know all three of you have created your own worlds, and you all are world builders, quite extensive world builders. When do you tell is too much of putting your world into the stories and not having the characters experience it organically, or just giving the audience too much information about this world that you have created?
Oh, that's a good question. There's this YouTube channel that I like to watch. I think it's called Yoel and Mari. It's about this lady. She's American, ethnically Cuban. She goes to Cuba for some reason for a while, marries a Cuban guy, and it's about him, like the first time he sees a grocery store, and he's just like flipping his lid and he's crying because you can get 8 different kinds of eggs. When you sort of introduce worlds, like maybe you can have something like that once, but if you're trying to invoke that reaction many, many times, like every time they go, like to a temple or to an airport, if you're trying to evoke that same reaction from the audience, I think you've gone too far. You get like one chance for the, oh, wow, this is awesome spread. And then like, it's got to get into the story and all the other stuff needs to just be a function of the narrative.
For me, I like to leave breadcrumbs. It's much, much better if things in the world are explained through the eyes or the experiences of a character, even if it's just osmosis. Just anytime you can get exposition out that doesn't read like exposition or is actually there because something's happening. That's my take.
Yeah, because there's like a lot of background notes I have for various planets and characters and other things. And I realized halfway through the series, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to just have the characters poke things and they'll find out through their interactions a little bit more about these places. And I won't like wall of text people, you know? Because like what they were saying earlier in the chat, like having one character explain something that another character should know, but doing it for the benefit of the audience is kind of meh, because it's like these characters should know certain elements about their setting that they don't have to
Mhm.
explain. So yeah, half the stuff I wrote up on for Taifa, for example, it's not in the story right now because I didn't really find a very good organic way to do it. So I'm like, you know what? I'll just do the normal little quote things at the beginning, and I'll introduce stuff through what the principal characters of the story rather than just like hitting everybody with all the stupid court intrigue of Taifa. It's like, nope, not gonna do, because sometimes some court intrigue stuff, like too much information on political backstabbing, meh.
There's nothing more interesting than three characters standing in front of a static background, spending 5 minutes talking about trade negotiations. I would say, as far as world building, if you want that information out there, there's always source books. If your book does well enough, people want to know, make a source book or notes at the back of the book if anyone cares to read it.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
I love doing that.
I mean, even Weber's early books did that. Like, oh, here's how the characters tell time. Here's some of the principal planets that are involved in some of their government setups. Oh, look, here's how the kind of the Washashi sails work, to let the ships go kind of like hyper capable. He put a lot of that in the back of the first book in case people wanted to read some more of the nuts and bolts. I wish he had done that for some of his later books instead of like pages of, this is how the missiles go pew pew.
One other example that you can approach laying out something. If you think about the narrative of the Matrix, the vast majority of the story really is just explaining the concept to the audience.
Mm-hmm.
That's the majority of the film, is explaining the concept.
Well, like, one of the best examples is, Neo's already taken the red pill. He's starting to begin his training. And you have the scene where he and Neo are walking down a city street.
Yeah.
That's an entire scene of nothing but exposition, but through visuals and Neo's reaction to what's around him. It goes from just an exposition scene to and actually a very tense scene, and giving the feel of what it's like to be in the Matrix versus the quote real world instead of an info dump.
Yeah. Okay.
So
that's the reason why I couldn't have a lot of these Typherian characters standing around explaining things to people. I basically let Eliza cause a lot of chaos socially over there, and then people got to see the repercussions as it was happening.
That's always fun. Okay, so I'm looking at the clock and we're approaching time. So what are everybody's last comments?
Do your research.
Yeah, and you can apply the research in the story, but try to remember the research should serve the story and the plot and not like bog it down.
Yeah, I agree. The research should serve the plot, but there's never too much research. There's always a new YouTube channel or finding some classic magazines,
Sure.
In garage sales and in the library.
Real quick, last minute question from Dark Stranger. How much information or suggestions would be necessary to avoid deconstructionists and the sort to make up things outside the story and author's intent with their own narrative?
Okay, how much information or suggestions would be necessary to avoid deconstructionists? Well, I mean, deconstructionists are just going to attack your work and try and tear culture apart no matter what you do. So I wouldn't really worry about that. The best thing you can do to stop deconstructionists is to write real stories and be successful. As far as the making stories outside the author's intent with their own narrative. Hey, if you're writing something that's successful enough that people are writing fan fiction, that's a problem you want to have.
Yang, Fiona?
I mean, I guess what could be tied to that is what's happening with Tolkien stuff.
Mhm.
It's actually a sign of how enduring his work is that they're trying to undermine it so many years after his death. As long as you have the original books, you'll always have something that can be used to say, no, the hobbits took the ring to Mount Doom. They weren't exploring any other kind of relationships. They were just taking the big giant evil thing to Mount Doom to destroy it.
Yeah, I mean, these people are all about intentional destruction. There's no way, there's no wall that you could build high enough or thick enough to defend against them. I wouldn't worry about that. I would just worry about trying to tell a good story and, that people enjoy and hopefully they get something out of.
There's no wall high enough to keep the deconstructionists out, but you can put them up against that wall.
Well, that is true. That is true.
And most of us now, especially that I'm trying to brand zero everything and not pay attention to skin suit IPs that are being used to destroy people's nostalgia factor, you can use your own works to rebuild things, reintroduce archetypes that may have fallen to the wayside because of the endless deconstruction.
Yeah, it was interesting. I was reading in the 80s, this kid sent Steve Ditko, one of the creators of Spider-Man, a letter. And the kid was like, oh, you must be so proud that Spider-Man is such a big character and everybody loves him. And Steve, being Steve, wrote back and he's like, no, Spider-Man is already in decline. There were characters from the 20s and the 30s that you've never heard of that were the big characters of the day. Everything will rise and fall. What's important is that you construct new myths and bring out new characters. And I think that's where we are. We had a great run, and the 80s were sort of a golden age, a pinnacle, and it kept going a bit into the 90s when it was on its way down a bit. And now it's just time for new people to make new things.
And put the deconstructionists up against the wall.
Or in helicopters, whichever.
Oh, even better. Sorry. Yeah, that's even better.
First class, right.
Yes.
All right. Well, we are pretty much at time now. So thank you to everyone in the chat for joining us this evening. As always, it has been a blast. So panel, where can everybody find you?
Okay, well, I'm on Bird site as Fiona Wolf 2. I'm on Minds as Fiona Wolf, and even on Gab also as Fiona Wolf. And also my blog, which I guess I'll just link here below. There we go.
I am on YouTube, Yang Yan Chao. Just had a video the other day about how to construct religions. I've got a few in a series, but about different rights that religions would have in common that you could use to easily build a, not a fantasy religion, what's the word I'm thinking of? Fictional religion. And also Friday at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern, I will be on the Dungeon Delvers channel.
Cool.
Very nice.
And finally, you can find me here as J.Ishiro Finney, author and alien in a human suit, or on Amazon as J.Ishiro Finney. And right now, Scars is now available in print. And I would love it if you guys went out and bought it, or at least reviewed it. And I've gotten a copy myself with the print version, and I'm very happy with it.
So,
Okay.
Sorry, I'm trying to.
Oh, you're trying to paste
Yeah.
latest video?
Yeah,
Let's see.
there it is.
We have the power. We just
We-
have to
I think we do.
reconstruct it.
There we go. So this is
There we go. There we
Yang's
go.
latest video. And as Ishi posted, Scars is available for print online. Go check it today. And whoops. There we go. We were getting some echo in our ears. So
Yeah,
thank
that's
you,
probably my fault.
everyone, once again for joining us this week for the Writer's Room. Tune in next week. We will be announcing very soon what the topic will be. But of course, it would be great if you all could join us. And thank you, Yang and Fiona. And I hope everybody has a wonderful evening.
Thanks for having me.
It was good having you on the air.
Totally. All right. Good night, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.